Hello. If you enjoyed the story, leave your comment, give it a like and subscribe. Thank you very much. God bless you. My name is David, and I thought I knew everything about my life until that cold October night changed everything forever. I'd been married to Sarah for 12 years, and we had what I believed was a solid relationship. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, often pulling night shifts, while I managed a small accounting firm downtown. My boss, Richard Sterling, was a man I'd respected for 8 years. Wealthy, successful, and seemingly happily married to his wife Margaret. That Tuesday night, I couldn't sleep. Our bedroom felt suffocating, and Sarah's side of the bed was cold and empty. She'd texted earlier saying she was working a double shift, covering for a sick colleague. I decided to take a walk around our quiet suburban neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear my restless mind. The streets were eerily silent, with only the occasional streetlight casting long shadows across the pavement. As I rounded the corner onto Maple Street, something caught my eye that made my blood run cold. There, parked under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, was Richard's distinctive black Mercedes. But what I saw next shattered my world completely. Sarah, my wife, my partner, the woman I'd trusted with my entire heart, was getting into the passenger seat. She was wearing a dark coat I'd never seen before, and her movements seemed hurried, almost secretive. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Questions raced through my mind like a tornado of confusion and betrayal. How long had this been going on? Was this why she'd been working so many extra shifts lately? I stood frozen behind a large oak tree, watching as the Mercedes pulled away into the darkness, its taillights disappearing around the corner like two red eyes mocking my ignorance. I stumbled home in a daze, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The house felt different now, colder, more foreign. Every family photo on the walls seemed to mock me, every shared memory now tainted with doubt. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at my phone, wanting to call Sarah but not knowing what to say. How do you confront the person you love most about something that could destroy everything you've built together? When Sarah came home at 7 a.m., she looked exhausted. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just fatigue. She kissed my forehead like she always did and headed straight for the shower. I watched her go, my heart breaking a little more with each step she took away from me, knowing that our life as I knew it was about to change forever. The next few days were torture. I became a detective in my own life, analyzing every word Sarah spoke, every glance she gave, every excuse she made. She continued her pattern of late-night shifts, and I found myself lying awake, wondering if she was really at the hospital or somewhere else entirely. The not knowing was eating me alive from the inside out. I decided I needed proof before confronting anyone. On Friday evening, I told Sarah I was going to visit my brother in the next town and wouldn't be back until Sunday. Her relief was almost palpable, which only confirmed my worst suspicions. Instead of leaving town, I checked into a small motel across from the hospital where Sarah claimed to work these mysterious night shifts. From my motel room window, I had a perfect view of the hospital parking lot. I waited with binoculars, feeling like a stalker in my own marriage. Hours passed with no sign of Sarah's car. My stomach churned with anxiety and anger. At 11:30 p.m., I saw Richard's Mercedes pull into the lot. My hands trembled as I adjusted the binoculars, and there she was, Sarah, getting out of the passenger side. But something was wrong with this picture. Instead of heading into the hospital, they both walked toward the emergency entrance, but then veered off toward a side building I'd never noticed before. It was a small, nondescript structure with no visible signs. They disappeared inside, and I was left with more questions than answers. I spent the entire night watching that building, but neither of them emerged until nearly 6 a.m. When they did, Sarah looked different, not guilty or secretive, but exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. There was something almost noble about her posture, despite her obvious fatigue. Richard, too, seemed drained but oddly satisfied, like someone who'd completed an important task. The next morning, I decided to do something that went against every moral fiber in my body. I followed Richard. I knew his routines, his favorite coffee shop, his weekend habits. What I discovered made me question everything I thought I knew about my boss. Instead of going home to his mansion, he drove to the poorest part of town, to a run-down community center. I watched from across the street as he carried boxes inside, staying for hours. My investigation was revealing layers of mystery I hadn't expected. This wasn't the simple affair I'd imagined. Something much more complex was happening, and I was beginning to realize that my assumptions might have been completely wrong. But I still needed answers, and I was determined to get them, no matter what the cost to my sanity or my marriage. My obsession with uncovering the truth was consuming every aspect of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate at work, and could barely look Sarah in the eye. She noticed my strange behavior and asked several times if I was feeling all right, but I deflected her concerns with vague excuses about work stress. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, lying to my wife about investigating her potential lies. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of following them, I would investigate that mysterious building where they'd disappeared. During my lunch break on Monday, I drove to the hospital and walked around the perimeter until I found it. Up close, I could see it was older than the main hospital, with small, frosted windows that prevented anyone from seeing inside. There was a small plaque by the door that simply read, "Specialized Care Unit, Authorized Personnel Only." My curiosity was killing me, but I couldn't just walk in without raising suspicions. I needed a legitimate reason to be there. That's when I remembered that my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had mentioned her grandson worked in hospital maintenance. I'd never spoken to him directly, but desperate times called for desperate measures. That evening, I knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door and asked about her grandson, Tommy. She was delighted to talk about him and mentioned he was working the night shift all week, covering for someone who was out sick. Perfect. I explained that I was thinking about a career change and was curious about different hospital departments. She gave me Tommy's number without hesitation. Tommy was surprisingly helpful when I called him. He explained that the specialized care unit was something most hospital staff didn't even know about. It was a privately funded facility that provided care for patients who couldn't afford treatment elsewhere. The work was completely voluntary, and only a select few medical professionals were involved. The secrecy was to protect the dignity of the patients, many of whom were prominent community members who had fallen on hard times. My heart began to race as the pieces started falling into place. Tommy mentioned that the unit operated primarily at night to maintain privacy, and that one of the most dedicated volunteers was a nurse named Sarah who had been donating her time there for over 2 years. He also mentioned that the program was funded by an anonymous benefactor who not only provided money but also personally volunteered his time. As Tommy continued talking, describing the incredible work being done in that small building, I felt a mixture of relief and shame washing over me. Relief that my wife wasn't having an affair, but overwhelming shame that I had so little faith in the woman I claimed to love. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Why hadn't Sarah told me about this volunteer work? Armed with this new information, I knew I had to confront Sarah, but I wasn't sure how to approach the conversation without revealing the extent of my surveillance and suspicion. The guilt of doubting her was eating me alive, but I also felt hurt that she'd kept such a significant part of her life hidden from me. That Thursday evening, I decided to be direct. When Sarah came home from what I now knew was her volunteer shift, I was waiting in the living room with 2 cups of coffee. She looked surprised but pleased, settling into her favorite chair with a tired smile. "Sarah," I began, my voice shakier than I'd intended. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Her expression immediately grew concerned, and she set down her coffee cup. "Of course, David. What's wrong? You've been acting strange lately, and I'm worried about you." I took a deep breath and decided to lay all my cards on the table. "I saw you getting into Richard's car last Tuesday night. I couldn't sleep, went for a walk, and saw you both leaving together. I've been going crazy trying to figure out what's happening." The color drained from Sarah's face, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of looking guilty or caught, she looked relieved. And then, to my complete surprise, she started crying. Not tears of shame or anger, but what seemed like tears of relief. "Oh, David," she whispered, reaching for my hands. "I've wanted to tell you so many times, but I signed a confidentiality agreement. The work we do, it's supposed to be completely anonymous." She explained everything, how she'd been recruited 2 years ago to volunteer at the specialized care unit, how Richard had been the anonymous benefactor funding the entire operation, and how they'd been providing free medical care to people who had nowhere else to turn. The secrecy wasn't about hiding an affair, it was about protecting the dignity of their patients and maintaining the integrity of the program. "But why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" I asked, still struggling with the hurt of being excluded from such an important part of her life. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Because I knew you'd want to help, and we barely have enough money for ourselves. I didn't want you to feel guilty about not being able to contribute financially to something I was passionate about. I thought I was protecting you from feeling inadequate." Her words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been suspecting her of betrayal, she'd been trying to protect my feelings. The irony was almost too much to bear. The revelation of Sarah's volunteer work should have been the end of our story, but it was actually just the beginning of an even more incredible truth. As we sat there in our living room, both of us crying and holding each other, Sarah told me there was something else, something that would explain why this particular week had been so difficult and secretive. "David, there's a patient at the unit, someone you know." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Someone who made me promise never to tell you, but I think it's time you knew." My mind raced through possibilities. Who could it be? A neighbor? A friend? Someone from work? "It's your father," she said quietly. The words didn't make sense at first. My father had died 5 years ago. I'd been at his funeral. I'd grieved for months. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Dad's been dead for 5 years. She shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "No, David. He's alive. The man who died was his identical twin brother, your Uncle Marcus, who you'd never met. Your father has been living under Marcus's identity since then, hiding from debts and legal troubles that would have destroyed our family if they'd been discovered." The room started spinning. Nothing made sense. "That's impossible." "I identified the body. I spoke at the funeral." "You identified Marcus, who had been living as a homeless man for years. The resemblance was perfect because they were identical twins. Your father couldn't bear to tell you the truth about his financial crimes, about the money he'd stolen from his business partners. He thought it was better to let you believe he was dead than to face the shame of what he'd done." Sarah explained that my father had been living in hiding, working odd jobs and struggling with severe depression and illness. When he'd finally reached out to the hospital for help, he'd been directed to the specialized care unit. Sarah had recognized him immediately, despite his dramatically changed appearance. "He's been dying, David. Really dying this time. Cancer. He has maybe weeks left, and he's been begging me not to tell you because he doesn't want your last memories of him to be of a criminal and a coward." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. My father, alive but dying, ashamed and hiding, being cared for by my wife and my boss in secret. The man I'd mourned and missed for 5 years had been suffering alone, too proud and too ashamed to reach out to his own son. "I need to see him," I whispered. That night, Sarah took me to the specialized care unit. Richard was there, as he was most nights, reading to patients who couldn't sleep. When he saw me, his face showed a mixture of relief and apprehension. In a small room at the end of the hall, I found my father. He was thin and frail, barely recognizable, but alive. When he saw me, he broke down completely. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry for everything." We talked until dawn, about his crimes, his fear, his love for me, and his regret about the years we'd lost. He died 3 weeks later, but this time, I was holding his hand. The truth had left everyone speechless, but it had also given us something precious. The chance to say goodbye properly, and the knowledge that love and forgiveness can survive even the most impossible circumstances.